Kindness without boundaries is one of the most misunderstood forms of courage. We are raised to believe that kindness is always good, always noble, always the right thing to offer, even when it costs us pieces of ourselves. But the truth is more complicated. When kindness is handed out without limits, without discernment, and without respect for our own emotional reality, it stops being kindness. It becomes self-betrayal. It becomes the quiet act of abandoning ourselves in the hope that someone else will finally see our worth. And what makes this so painful is that it is often done with a good heart. We don't set out to lose ourselves. We simply want to be seen, valued, accepted, or loved. We are trying to prove that we are safe, gentle, forgiving, and understanding. But when that desire for connection turns into a habit of giving more than we receive, we slowly begin to disappear in relationships that cannot or will not return the same care. Kindness is powerful only when it honors the person offering it as much as the person receiving it. Without boundaries, kindness becomes permission. It quietly tells others, "You can take more from me than I can comfortably give." It says, "I will adjust, I will bend, I will stretch. I will carry the emotional labor so you don't have to." And people who are used to receiving without giving back will interpret your endless kindness as an invitation, not a gift. They begin to expect it. They begin to rely on it. And the moment you stop, they will call you selfish, distant, or cold, because your boundaries feel like deprivation to someone who has lived off your endless generosity. This is where the self-betrayal begins. Every time you say yes with a tight chest and a tired heart, your body knows the truth even if your voice refuses to speak it. Every time you comfort someone at the cost of your own emotional stability, you learn to silence your needs. Every time you excuse hurtful behavior because you want to stay kind, you teach yourself that your pain matters less. And the more you do this, the more you begin to believe that your only value lies in what you can offer, not in who you are. This is not kindness, it's survival disguised as compassion. Healthy kindness comes from a place of fullness, not depletion. It comes from a grounded sense of self, not fear. It says, "I care about you, but I care about me too." It says, "I will show up with empathy, but I will not abandon myself to do it." Boundaries are the structure that protect the softness in you. Without them, your tenderness becomes a target for misuse. With them, your tenderness becomes a strength. To reclaim your true kindness, you must first reclaim your voice. You must practice the small bravery of saying no, even when your instinct is to smooth everything over. You must learn to pause before giving, ask yourself what it will cost, and honor your answer. You must allow yourself to disappoint people who were comfortable taking advantage of your generosity. You must remember that kindness offered at the expense of your own self-respect is not kindness, it is emotional self-harm. The most compassionate thing you can do for yourself is to acknowledge that your feelings are real, your needs are valid, and your boundaries are necessary. And the most compassionate thing you can do for others is to teach them how to love you in a way that does not require you to sacrifice yourself. Kindness without boundaries is self-betrayal, but kindness with boundaries is self-respect in action. You cannot heal someone by shrinking yourself. Yet so many of us have been taught, directly or quietly, that love means sacrifice, even when that sacrifice costs us our emotional safety. We learn to soften our voice, dim our presence, and fold ourselves into shapes that make other people more comfortable. We tell ourselves that if we can just stay quiet enough, patient enough, forgiving enough, maybe the other person will finally change. Maybe they will finally see our pain. Maybe they will become the person we keep hoping they can be. But change that is coerced, begged for, or bought with your self-worth is not real change. It is compliance. And compliance never leads to healing. When you shrink yourself to protect someone else from facing their own behavior, you become the shield that prevents them from growing. Every time you absorb their anger so they don't have to confront it, every time you excuse their disregard because you don't want conflict, every time you overextend yourself to keep the peace, you unintentionally send a message, "You don't have to take responsibility, I will carry the weight for both of us." And some people will let you carry it indefinitely. Not because they are incapable of healing, but because your shrinking makes it easy for them to avoid the discomfort that healing requires. Your silence, your self-neglect, and your emotional acrobatics do. Not inspire transformation. They delay it. True healing for anyone comes from facing truth, not avoiding it. It comes from accountability, not comfort. And when you reduce yourself so that someone else can stay comfortable, the only thing you heal is their ability to continue hurting you without consequences. This shrinking comes in many forms. You lower your expectations because they call you demanding. You stop speaking up because they accuse you of overreacting. You hide your accomplishments because they feel threatened. You stifle your sadness because they get irritated when you're not okay. You pretend you're fine because you've learned that your truth disrupts their world. Slowly, you begin living in a smaller emotional space, one where their needs expand and yours dissolve. You begin believing that the only way to keep the relationship intact is by diminishing yourself. But a relationship that survives only when one person shrinks is not a relationship. It is a slow erosion of identity. Healing someone else is not your job. Supporting them, yes. Encouraging them, yes. But healing requires self-work. It requires ownership of wounds and patterns. It requires honesty. And most importantly, it requires the willingness to change. You cannot do that work for another person, no matter how big your heart is or how deep your love runs. When you try to heal someone by dimming your needs, you only teach them that your well-being is negotiable. You teach them that they can remain the same while you do all the bending. The cost of shrinking is high. You lose your voice. You lose your confidence. You lose the vibrancy that once made you feel alive. You begin to forget what it feels like to be loved in a way that doesn't require you to disappear. And the saddest part is that the person you're shrinking for rarely notices what they are taking from you. They only notice when you finally stop. Real love, healthy love, expansive love thrives when both people show up fully. It grows when honesty is allowed, when boundaries are respected, when both hearts have room to breathe. You were never meant to make yourself small so others can avoid facing their own shadows. You were meant to live whole, speak your truth, and offer kindness without losing yourself in the process. You cannot heal someone by shrinking yourself, because healing never requires you to disappear. It requires you to stand firmly in who you are. Your worth isn't measured by how much pain you can carry. Yet, many of us have internalized the idea that endurance equals value, that if we can hold more, tolerate more, forgive more, and survive more, then somehow we are stronger and more deserving of love. We learn this in quiet ways, through families that praise us for being easy, relationships that reward our silence, and societies that applaud resilience while ignoring the emotional toll it demands. Over time, we begin to merge strength with suffering, believing that the more we can endure, the more valuable we become. But pain tolerance is not a measure of worth. It is often a sign of how deeply we have been conditioned to neglect ourselves. There is a dangerous myth embedded in the idea of heroic suffering, that carrying emotional burdens without complaint makes you noble, that staying loyal in the face of neglect proves your commitment, that absorbing someone else's chaos without setting boundaries shows your depth, but pain carried silently does not make you admirable, it makes you invisible. People who rely on your ability to endure will rarely stop to ask how much it costs you. They will praise your strength while continuing to hand you more weight. They will call you dependable while overlooking your exhaustion, and slowly you begin to believe that your identity is tied to how well you can handle being hurt. When you define your worth through suffering, you begin to seek validation in places that feed on your endurance. You stay in relationships that drain you because leaving feels like failure. You overextend yourself at work because exhaustion feels like proof of dedication. You hold emotional responsibility for everyone around you because you fear disappointing them. You become the one who always understands, always forgives, always adjusts. And the world becomes comfortable with your self-abandonment. This is not strength. It is the quiet collapse of your emotional boundaries. Your pain is not proof of your value. Your pain is a signal. It tells you where you have been pushing too hard, giving too much, or staying too long in places that cannot hold your heart with care. Pain is a teacher, not a trophy. It invites you to pay attention, not to keep accumulating wounds as evidence of your character. When you allow suffering to define your worth, you begin to live in a reversed version of love, one where you trade your emotional well-being for temporary approval or hope or closeness. But real love does not require you to bleed for it. Your worth is inherent. It does not rise when you are hurt or fall when you protect yourself. It is not increased by your ability to stay quiet in the face of disrespect. It is not proven by the weight you can hold without breaking. Worth is rooted in your humanity and your capacity for joy, tenderness, connection, courage, and truth. The most courageous thing you can do is listen to your pain instead of carrying it like a badge of honor. Healing begins when you stop equating endurance with kindness, when you stop believing that staying is braver than leaving, when you stop thinking that absorbing hurt makes you strong. Strength is not the absence of breaking, it is the presence of self-respect. It is the moment you say, I matter too. It is recognizing that your heart wasn't designed to be a container for everyone's suffering. It was designed to beat, to feel, to connect, to grow. You do not need to prove your worth through suffering. You do not need to earn love by carrying more than your share. You do not need to shrink your joy to make your pain appear impressive. You are worthy because you exist, not because you endure. The real journey is not learning how to carry more pain. It is learning that you deserve a life with far less of it. Love without accountability is not love. It may look like love, feel like love, and even sound like love in the way words are spoken, but without accountability, it becomes something fragile, unbalanced, and ultimately unsafe. Accountability is the bridge between intention and impact. It is what transforms affection into trust, commitment into growth, and connection into something real. When someone refuses to take responsibility for the harm they cause, no matter how small or how unintentional they are, not offering love, they are offering comfort for themselves. And comfort without responsibility creates a relationship where one person carries the emotional weight while the other walks freely, untouched by the consequences of their actions. Accountability is not about blame. It is not about punishment. It is about awareness. It is the ability to say, I see the impact of my actions, and I care enough to change. Without this, there is no safety in the relationship because love becomes unpredictable. It becomes a cycle of hurt followed by temporary peace, apologies without change, promises without follow-through. Accountability is what gives love structure. It tells you that the person standing beside you is not just invested in how you make them feel, but also in how they make you feel. Without it, affection becomes one-sided. You find yourself walking on emotional eggshells, adjusting your tone, softening your needs, monitoring your expressions, trying to avoid triggering the same unaddressed behaviors over and over again. When accountability is absent, the burden of emotional labor shifts unfairly. You become the one who explains, forgives, rationalizes, and absorbs. You start justifying their behavior to yourself, telling yourself they didn't mean it, that they're stressed, that you're asking for too much. But what you're really doing is carrying the weight of a love that refuses to stand on its own. Love that demands you stay quiet while someone else stays comfortable is not love. It is emotional imbalance disguised as devotion. And the longer you stay in that imbalance, the more you begin to doubt your own legitimacy. You start believing that your hurt isn't real, your needs aren't valid, or your boundaries are unreasonable. True love requires courage. It requires someone to look inward and acknowledge their role in the dynamic. It requires honesty, humility, and a willingness to grow. Accountability strengthens love because it deepens trust. It says, you can be vulnerable with me, you can tell me when I've hurt you, you matter enough for me to change. This kind of love creates space for repair rather than repetition. It allows both people to evolve, not just one. It allows mistakes to become lessons instead of patterns. When you are in a relationship without accountability, you are constantly negotiating with your own heart. You feel the dissonance between what you're receiving and what you deserve. You make excuses because you want to believe the best. You stay hopeful because hope feels easier than confrontation. But the truth is that love cannot grow when one person refuses to stand in their truth. Love cannot strengthen when one person avoids responsibility. Love cannot heal when one person keeps asking the other to absorb the consequences of their behavior. You deserve love that takes responsibility. You deserve love that can say, "I'm sorry," and then show the change in action. You deserve love that honors the weight of your feelings, not just the comfort of your forgiveness. Accountability may feel uncomfortable in the moment, but it is the foundation of a relationship that can last. It is what transforms love from something fragile into something resilient. Without accountability, love is merely longing full of desire, but empty of growth. With accountability, love becomes a place where two people can meet fully, honestly, and safely, without one person carrying the truth for both. Boundaries are an act of courage, not cruelty. Yet so many people carry guilt the moment they try to set them. We fear hurting others, disappointing them, being misunderstood, or being labeled selfish. We were raised to believe that good people always say yes, always stay available, always absorb discomfort to keep the peace. But boundaries are not walls built to shut people out. They are doors that protect the integrity of who we are. They allow us to stay open without being overwhelmed, compassionate without being consumed, loving without losing ourselves in the process. Boundaries do not push people away. They teach people how to love us safely. Courage lies in the moment you say, "This no longer works for me," even when your voice shakes. It lives in the decision to protect your emotional space, even if someone else wants access to it at all times. Setting boundaries is not an act of rejection. It is an act of self-respect. It is honoring your energy, your time, your emotional capacity, and your humanity. When you choose to stand up for your limits, you are not being unkind. You are choosing not to abandon yourself for the comfort of others. What makes boundaries so difficult is that people who benefit from your lack of boundaries will often be the ones who call you selfish for setting them. They will interpret your no as an attack because they were accustomed to you stretching beyond what was healthy for you. They will feel slighted when you stop making their needs your first priority. But their discomfort does not mean you're doing something wrong. It simply means you're changing the dynamics they relied on. And sometimes, the moment you stop sacrificing yourself for others is the moment you see who was appreciating you and who was using you. Boundaries create clarity, and clarity creates healthier relationships. Without boundaries, resentment begins to grow. You start giving more than you can handle, then feeling invisible when your effort goes unnoticed. You begin hiding your true feelings to avoid conflict, then feeling misunderstood because no one knows what you actually need. You show up again and again, even when you are emotionally drained, then feel guilty because you can't sustain it. This cycle isn't compassion, it's self-neglect. And over time, it erodes your sense of worth. Courage is choosing to break that cycle. It's choosing to speak up instead of silently suffering. It's choosing discomfort in the moment over long-term resentment. Boundaries don't make you cold, they make your love sustainable. They allow your relationships to breathe, grow, and become rooted in mutual respect instead of obligation or fear. When someone truly cares for you, they will not be threatened by your boundaries. They will appreciate the honesty because it shows them what you need to stay connected, present, and authentic. There is nothing cruel about telling someone how to treat you. There is nothing unkind about protecting your mental health. There is nothing selfish about deciding what is acceptable and what is not. Boundaries are an invitation to deeper connection. They say, "Here is what allows me to stay open with you." They say, "Here is how we can remain close without me losing myself." Boundaries are not the end of love, they are the beginning of real, healthy, sustainable love. You have the right to protect your peace. You have the right to choose who has access to your energy. You have the right to step back from dynamics that drain you. And you have the right to honor your limits without offering an apology. Setting boundaries is not an act of cruelty. It is one of the most courageous commitments you can make to yourself. It is saying, "I matter too," and finally believing it. Walking away is sometimes the most compassionate choice. It doesn't feel that way at first. It feels like giving up, abandoning someone, or failing to make things work. It feels heavy, confusing, and even selfish, especially when your heart is wired to stay, to try harder, to hold on a little longer. But there comes a moment when staying does more harm than leaving, when holding on erodes your peace, your identity, and your ability to show up with love, not only for the other person, but for yourself. Compassion is not about suffering in silence. It is about choosing what nurtures truth, dignity, and emotional safety. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is step away from what continually breaks you. Walking away is not an act of anger. It is an act of clarity. It is the moment you recognize that your effort cannot undo someone else's unwillingness, that your tenderness cannot transform someone's patterns, that your patience cannot fix what another person refuses to acknowledge. You realize that staying is costing you the parts of yourself you used to cherish: your confidence, your laughter, your softness. You begin to see that love does not grow in a space where only one person is tending to it. And when you finally walk away, you are not walking toward loneliness. You are walking toward alignment, toward healing, toward a version of yourself that deserves to breathe again. One of the hardest truths to accept is that you can care for someone deeply and still choose not to share your life with them. Love alone is not enough to sustain a connection without respect, accountability, reciprocity, or emotional safety. Sometimes the person you're trying so hard to hold on to is the very reason you've forgotten who you are. Staying might feel like loyalty, but it can also be self-abandonment in disguise. When you walk away, you are choosing to stop betraying yourself in the name of love that has stopped loving you back in a healthy way. Compassion is not always gentle. Sometimes it is bold, firm, and unsettling. It asks you to choose truth over comfort. It asks you to see the bigger picture, the one where staying keeps you stuck in cycles that drain you, while walking away opens the door to healing you didn't realize you needed. Compassion is not about sparing someone's feelings at the expense of your own well-being. It is about honoring the parts of you that have been silent for too long, the parts that whisper, "You deserve better," even when you're afraid to believe it. Walking away also means trusting that growth can happen in the space between two people. Sometimes distance is the only catalyst for reflection. When you remove yourself from a dynamic filled with pain or imbalance, you are giving both hearts room to breathe. You are giving the other person the chance to confront their own patterns instead of depending on your endurance to cushion the impact. You are giving yourself the chance to rediscover joy without walking on emotional eggshells. Distance is not cruelty sometimes. It is the only path toward clarity. And yes, walking away hurts. It shakes your sense of identity. It disrupts routines, expectations, and dreams you once held tightly. But pain is not always a sign that something is wrong. Sometimes it's the sign that something is shifting, healing, recalibrating. The ache you feel is not just loss, it is release. It is your heart making space for peace you forgot you deserved. Sometimes the most compassionate choice is stepping away, not because you stopped caring, but because you finally started caring about yourself. It is choosing healing over hope that never turns into reality. It is choosing truth over illusions. It is choosing a version of life where your emotional well-being isn't a constant sacrifice. Walking away is not weakness. It is the quiet courage of saying, "I will not stay where love asks me to disappear."